Hey everybody, welcome back to NikkiT.live. I'm your host Nick Taylor, and today I am hanging out with Corbin Crutchley. I never asked you how to pronounce your last name, but I think I nailed it.
You nailed it. You nailed it.
Yeah, all right,
Yeah,
okay.
good job.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, no, thanks for joining me, Corbin.
Yeah.
We're gonna be digging into TanStack Form, obviously, but like you've been up to quite a few things, and I know like a lot of people are always curious how people get into tech or like, what, not to sound too cheesy, but what your journey's been. But I don't know if you want to maybe touch on that a bit before we kind of jump into the main event.
Yeah, sure. I was in high school, struggling in high school. Eventually kind of found my way out of high school very early.
Okay.
Kind of dropped out arguably. And my neighbor, like I had always been interested in tech, I had like in middle school, I remember they pulled me out of a class once to go fix a printer.
Okay.
Just because they knew that I was like that interested in tech, like I knew what I was doing to some degree.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember my neighbor had asked me to fix her son's computer because it wouldn't play Minecraft, right?
Okay.
And this is like a really early version of Minecraft, right? So I
Mhm.
went over to her house, realized that Java was not installed, so I installed Java. Ta-da,
Okay.
fixed Minecraft, right? And from there, she was like, "Oh, you should stop by my new job. We're looking for IT people. Like, at least come
Oh,
intern with
nice.
us, right?" And it
Yeah.
was a adult education high school, charter school,
Okay.
and I ended up interning there for a year or two while doing open source. And
Okay.
eventually, the experience of that job, like, because, I'd done a little bit of programming in that job as well. But the experience of that job plus my open source stuff got the attention of a local startup here in
Okay.
Sacramento. And they offered me an opportunity to join them as a web developer. And that's kind of how I got started.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. And like
Yeah.
touching on open source, like I know you from open source, and you've been doing that for quite a while now, and like you've been up to a lot of things, obviously. Like at least
Mhm.
the stuff I'm aware of. I think you like obviously we'll talk about TanStack Form, but I think you were in the Angular community at some point.
Yeah.
Um, there's also like I haven't read all the books because it's a lot to consume, but the framework field guide is like I guess it's an ebook or also a website that uh, kind of I think the TLDR is kind of like you showcase how each framework handles certain scenarios or like problem spaces. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, so it's part of a larger project called Playful Programming, which is a
okay,
developer education nonprofit.
yeah,
Framework Field Guide is a book that teaches you React, Angular, and Vue all at once.
okay, yeah. No, that's super cool. It's like as somebody who worked on the frameworks team at Netlify, I find that super interesting because like
Yeah,
obviously people kind of get set in their ways like hey I'm a react dev or like I'm an angular dev and like not that people don't do both per se. Like a mutual friend of ours, my old coworker Brandon, is actually doing both right now. He's
yeah.
obviously known for Angular and like analog JS, but he's telling me at his new role, uh, I think there's a lot of micro front end architecture, and there's just like some things like maybe the headers in React, but like part of the app is still in Angular and so on. So it's
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting mixing the frameworks too. I think. Well, in that case, I think they're like literally separate apps, but when you stitch it all together in the DOM, it's kind of interesting. To have two frameworks running, and I'm curious, like in your experience, have you ever noticed, like obviously a framework is is what abstracts away the DOM. Typically, you can reach in
Yeah.
there and modify it. But have you ever seen stuff like I don't know, two frameworks running, and one just scraps something else, or
Yeah, so it's interesting. Obviously, I think that tends to be a pretty bad pattern if you're like just doing it for fun.
yeah,
But if you're doing it for incremental migration, I think it can be very, very valid.
yeah,
There's a lot of instances where you end up with an older version of Angular JS, right? Like not even
yeah,
Angular 2, like old school Angular JS. And you want to be able to port it to React or you want to be able to port it to Vue or whatever, right?
yeah,
I think there's a lot of value in being able to create reactive primitives that go from one
mhm,
to the other. And you can usually do that by just bootstrapping a new like application inside of one another.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's interesting. I worked at Autodesk like in
Mhm.
2018 and 2019, and yeah, the app was a Rails monolith, but the front end
Mm,
was, I don't know if you ever worked with Sencha, but it's like a
mm,
older framework. I think it was initially just for mobile. And anyways, they had an old version of Sencha. Like I don't know what version they're on now, but like uh, the version at the project I was working on is probably still on some forked version of version 1. Um, like, Rails was forked at some point. I think they're trying to get that back in, but, like, the the weird thing was, like, I was in a larger company too, you get hired and you're this specific role only. It's, like,
right.
different from startup where you can kinda like, "Hey, I'm doing front end, but you have problems deploying, I'll help," whatever. But here I
Yep.
was just web developer, and uh, they had this whole design system in React, and there was like an adjacent product that would leverage APIs from the main app. And this
Mhm.
other app it wasn't Electron. This was it like in the movie and video gaming industry. So it was something like Electron, but I can't remember the name. But anyways, so like they were building out these like great UIs because they were using all this design system. And meanwhile, the main app, you know, like every time a feature would come up, or like a not so much a bug fix, more a feature, like we want to put in React, and then like there would be this whole conversation like, oh, it's going to take forever, and like it was literally jQuery and the Sencha framework, so it's like it just didn't fit yet. And then like I don't know, I kept getting frustrated, and at one point I just called a meeting and I said, like, listen, like, if you always talk about using React and you never do, like, you can, like, to your point about like a migration path or like a
Yep.
hybrid approach. And like, I just showed them, it's literally in a code pen. I just said, like, here's like imperative DOM, like maybe some jQuery. I didn't include Sench or
Yeah.
anything because it really didn't matter. But it's like, here's the DOM. uh, React, all it does is it mounts somewhere in the document object model. Like typically with like a spa, it's always at the root, some root ID element, like a div. But like you could literally put it
Yeah.
anywhere. And
Anywhere.
I just show them. I said like you can just start building out the app in React here. And I just showed this, like I know this is very obvious to you, but like to them, they're like, oh, okay. Like they didn't realize they could still be operating in imperative land. Like you could obviously overwrite some stuff in React land, but like if you had some kind of guidance, and so like I just
Yep.
showed like here's a React component, here's like imperative DOM, and they're coexisting, and that like started the path of them. I don't know if they ever did completely move to React, but like to your point about like migration paths and stuff, and it was like I don't know. It's just I found it interesting. I was also very frustrated, like I said. But
Yeah. Well, and it's funny
yeah,
because like I have a strong fascination with multiple frameworks, right? So like
yeah,
we'll touch on this a little bit, but TanStack Form supports multiple frameworks, right?
yeah,
TanStack Store, which I built to build Form, supports like multiple frameworks and works without a framework at all.
yeah.
And then like even stuff like Redux, I ported Redux to Angular and Vue officially. So like, and then I
Okay.
got a little demo working of Redux synchronizing three different frameworks in the same application. Like, there's something to me of like, oh, I can build this in like a core primitive that can then be adapted to each framework. That is just like so much fun to work with.
Yeah, no, and like obviously, like y- you're like a lot of people that like to work in open, not everybody, but like I think you're like a teacher at heart. So like these things are also just like not necessarily like I don't mean in an academic sense, but like it's just fascinating to be
Yeah,
able to teach these things and show these things.
big
And
time.
I I think it's fun too when you make like wacky demos like, "Hey, let's have Vue update this React app," or something, like
Mhm.
people would never do that in production probably, but like just in terms of showcasing and learning, I think
Yeah.
that's what makes things fun, when it's just very boring straight tutorial, I think it just doesn't hit as much, but
No, I totally agree.
yeah,
Totally agree.
yeah. Cool, cool. Well, you mentioned TanStack Form, and obviously we're going to talk about TanStack Form. So, I guess I guess let's talk about that. Like I'm a fan of TanStack in general. Like I've been digging into TS router. Did I'm really looking forward to TanStack start becoming stable. I know it's
Yeah.
relatively stable because they've been using a nozzle in production for a while, but yeah, like uh, TanStack Form was, I don't know how long it was in the works, but you hit 1.0. I think it was like last
Yep.
month or maybe a month and a half ago. And yeah, so I guess for folks like they can probably kind of guess what it is to some degree, but what makes TanStack Form different from like other form libraries maybe is
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Good question. So I think it comes down to like defaults, right?
okay.
Um, I mean, there's the obvious of like, oh, it's framework agnostic, but like if I'm a React application author, I don't care about
Yeah.
that, right? Just realistic, I don't.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, so then it comes to again the defaults, right? Um, if you look at React hook form, or if you look at
Mhm.
Formic, they're very, very good at building like simplistic forms. And
Yeah.
I think that the strong suit of form libraries is very, very, very complex, large scale forms that you're able to apply across your code base, right?
Okay, yeah.
So like React hook form, you have the register method with the spread operator for inputs, right?
Mhm.
But with TanStack form, like you have this like kind of more complex hook that returns components that you then use in your code base. And at
Okay.
first it's like, okay, well, this is just worse. Like TanStack form is just more complex and worse, right? But when you start developing a component system that builds on top of forms, you have your
Yeah.
inputs, you have your selects, you have or whatever, you realize that you start building out components, right?
Mhm.
And those components need to be extracted from the core of the framework library themselves.
Yeah.
So the challenge is in React hook form, for example, the way that you would do that is using the controller component, especially if you're doing something in React Native where you can't use the register function.
Okay.
And the challenge there is that the defaults aren't very friendly to being able to abstract your logic.
Okay.
Meanwhile, TanStack Form only has a single API, and that single API is just um, consistent with things. Josh
Yeah.
Goldberg has one of my
Yeah,
favorite
yeah.
questions of all
I think
time.
I think he's I think he's trolling you, but
He totally is, but I can actually answer that.
yeah,
Why don't you just fetch? Why do we even need forms? User experience, right? If we have a form that requires complex validation logic, you should and can validate on the server even with TanStack form.
yeah,
But what you want to do is you want to provide more instantaneous feedback, and you want to provide that user experience of like, oh, I'm missing this thing, or I need to do this complex validation logic to articulate this reasoning to the user more
yeah,
immediately than a fetch.
yeah, totally. And it's just like it just kills the whole accessibility story too. And
Yep.
like it's like and I'm honestly guilty of this initially. Like I did a lot of .NET back in the day, and I remember when ASP.NET update panels came out. This was during the Ajax era, which people call fetch now, I guess. But um, you could literally actually .NET was a little better because there was always a form on the page, but like you could like I guess it was more once I started doing React with spas like in 2015, 2016, and you could literally just because you can still just do a fetch, make an async call, get data
Yeah.
back, but like and you probably had a button that was a div and you had an on click, like there was all just kinds of terrible things in place. And although like to to somebody who didn't have any disabilities, maybe you're like whatever, it's fine, but like clearly it's not, and you
Yeah.
lose so many, like even if you forget the accessibility thing for a sec, like just like being able, like it is accessibility too, but like tabbing through things, focus states, like even I don't know it. Anyways, yeah, thank you
Well,
for the
and
troll,
also
Josh.
like if you think about developer experience, right? If you have a form with let's say 20 fields, right? You have a reasonably large form.
Yeah,
Well, are you going to have a set state with use effects to synchronize the validation logic? Like
yeah,
I would love for someone who thinks that form libraries are simple to go build their own forms using like
Yeah.
no hook abstractions and no like because that's a library at that point, right? Like the minute you
Yeah,
start
totally.
abstracting into your own, like you can write your own form library, totally go do it, right?
Yeah.
But if you think that you're not using a form library, write a form with 20 different inputs and tell me how fun that is.
Yeah,
It's usually not a
exactly.
great time.
Yeah, and I know we're gonna dig into some code and do some live coding probably, but
Yeah.
I am curious, like under the hood, there's obviously like you were talking kind of like about the React hooks here, but like TanStack Form is generic. But under the hood, like, are you leveraging form data, like, do you have like some kind of internal state that you're using that's agnostic to frameworks or?
Yeah, so what we're using TanStack Store, which is a signals implementation, and
Okay,
we use this to have the core state in a store, and then the derived state in a derivative store.
okay,
So, and the
okay.
cool part there is that we are able to have a reactive primitive that lives outside the framework, and then glue it back into the framework once we have knowledge of what framework the user is using.
Okay, I see. And like I guess like in the to get a little nerdy here. So like the TanStack store, it's still scoped within your instance of your
Mhm.
form. Like it's just like some internal variable and it has access to just because of closures and stuff, you have access to it, or is it just defined
Yep.
at the top level or okay.
It's defined at the top level of the form, but it's still
Yeah.
within the use form hook instance. So it's not like a
Okay.
global.
Okay, gotcha. And I guess to to I guess question or not so much pushback, but I'm curious, like even with those stores, did you ever consider using actual form data like the APIs, or it just because you're talking about like a form library is really more for complex libraries, sorry, complex forms.
Mhm.
Is that why you potentially just didn't opt for it in the end, or is it in there at some point?
Sure. So I think that there's two parts of this, right? We have the DOM form story, but then we also
Yeah,
have non-DOM usage of frameworks, right? So the
yeah,
big one is React Native, right? So
yeah.
when I started working on form libraries, I actually started working on this form library specifically for a React Native project.
Oh,
So
okay, okay.
like form data was not really an option when you don't have the concept of a form in React Native, really, right?
Okay, yeah, true. Well played.
But beyond that, there is a server side story for TanStack
Okay.
Form, like integrates with TanStack Start, Next.js, whatnot, and that
Mhm.
does use form data to be able to
Okay.
consolidate and access information, which I think makes perfect sense because you're not submitting server data from a like mobile app and return like doesn't
Yeah.
typically happen.
Okay, so at that point, it's using form data APIs, but once you
Mhm.
and it makes sense to your point because like a lot of the well, TanStack anything is really at least now is they're all generic libraries that do have
Yeah.
like a thin layer for each framework. So it makes sense to your point about like why you're using TanStack Store. One, it's a very good point about the React Native just not having forms. I actually just had web dev on my brain, so I hadn't even
Yeah.
considered the. Uh, also, I learned I guess you can use it in React Native. I didn't know that.
It's all
So
good.
that makes total sense. Yeah. Okay. So okay, so I think I kind of get it now, and the fact that uh, TanStack Store uses signals, it doesn't matter because like there's the whole thing about React and signals don't play well together. But this is literally just at the data, like it has nothing to do with React at that point. It's the
Mhm.
generic store of it, and then
Well, React does play a part into it, but the problem is that React doesn't work well with signals. Kind of doesn't work. Like, I don't believe in that
yeah,
sense. I think that there are implementations of signals that don't work well with React. But I think
yeah,
React as an idea works very well with signals. I mean, look at Jotai, right? Jotai
yeah,
has what is it, a couple million downloads a week now?
yeah,
Not for nothing, right?
yeah. I haven't used Jotai, so I did not know they use signals. Like I know, like I've used Preact a lot, and I know they have a
Yeah,
signals
yeah.
implementation. Um,
And their signals
I,
implementation is very good, like
Yeah.
as like a baseline, but it also does have compatibility problems with React. But that's
Yeah.
because it's built for Preact originally, right? Like that makes
Yeah.
sense that there's going to be some slight edge cases with the reconciler and such.
Yeah. I guess my point about it not playing well with React, at least from my knowledge, was more like y- like the signal, like you said, it knows where it needs to update. It's just that it might update things, but React could kind of crush it when the VDOM runs again and then just kind of like gets the new state. I guess that was my thing, or is that even not an issue? Because I
Uh,
remember reading some stuff about people just saying React and signals like it would be a complete rewrite if you had to do that. But that's in the core of React. But like,
yeah.
yeah,
But there's ways that we can bind React code into a signals library. I can actually show how that works if you'd like. Maybe that's where
yeah,
we start
yeah.
with the live coding.
Cool.
Cool.
Let's do that. Let me go to guest share here. Okay, cool. I'm just gonna grab your URL for your page here.
And then I get to oust myself for how long it's been since I've pulled from TanStack libraries.
Cool, cool, cool. I might need to resize your screen once it's on here. We'll see.
Yep. Give me just a
Just give me
second.
a sec. Okay, no, I think it's a good size. Yeah, I guess just if you can zoom in a few things,
Yep.
but
Yep.
cool.
Cool, cool. And you know what? Just because I know it'll misbehave otherwise, we'll even PNPMI while
Okay.
streaming. How risky.
Yeah, yeah. Do you mind zooming it in maybe two more times? I can read it, but okay, cool.
Like that?
Yeah, no, it's all good.
Cool, cool.
Okay,
Okay, so
so
while it's
yeah,
PNPM installing, we can dive in. So, what is a signal? I'll start there for folks that may not be as familiar.
okay,
Also,
cool.
Kevin Vandy, what's up, man? How you doing?
Oh,
Got another
hey,
Tin
how's it
Soldier
going,
in the
Kevin?
house.
Yeah, yeah. We hung out together doing some TanStack table last year, I think it was. Yeah,
Nice.
hey, he's good
Yeah,
people.
nice. Yeah, he is. So, okay. So the
Cool.
rough idea of a store, uh, or any signal, is that
Yeah.
we have the ability to subscribe to state changes, and when the state changes through a method or through like some kind of interface, it
Hmm.
will then go flush changes to the system, which will call your listeners when the relevant state has changed, right?
Yeah.
So it's ironic. Like if you ignore this flush method, which gets into some scary, slightly scary scheduler territory, right?
Okay.
But if you ignore this method, the original version of this looks something like this dot listeners dot for each, and in fact, it's going to write it for me.
Yeah,
It's
and
not going to write it
iterate
for
over
me.
them. Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is that you would just call the listeners, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So you might have a very, very, very basic version of your, we're just going to delete this. You might have a very, very basic version of a store in like 30, 50 lines of code, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm just going to revert all this. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. No worries.
The challenge with signals comes into play when you have derived state, um, mostly because derived state has this concept of dependencies, right?
Yeah.
So what you can do is you can have A here. Let me zoom in a little bit more. You have A here, which is your root store or signal. And then you have B, C, and D, which are derived signals, right?
Hmm.
And you might have D that relies on B and B and C both rely on A, right?
Yeah.
Well, how do you get D to only run once when A is updated, right? So, like, let's say
Okay.
that this is a number, right? One, and this is one and one as well, just to keep this really simple, right?
Yeah.
So when this changes, and then this is like the combination of B and Z, so it's two, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I update A to two, if we do depth first algorithm, then B becomes two and D is now three. That's
Yeah.
wrong, right? Because that's like an interim state before this turns two and this turns four, right?
Yeah.
So this is the only reason why our implementation is a little bit more complex, is that it deals with
Okay.
like checking the dependency tree and flushing the internals and whatever else, right? Doing batch depth and such, right?
Okay.
But the gist of it is that if we look at our tests, We expect a store.state to equal the initial value that's passed. You can subscribe to the store,
Yeah.
and then you can set the state. And not only will the subscription update, but you will also end up getting the updated version of state. Ta-da!
Okay.
Right? Like pretty straightforward. And then
Yeah.
finally, a derived might look something like this. So we have a count. So half of a count has a dependency on the count store. You have a function which does count.state divided by 2. And now I will mount that derived state. And now if I were to do count.setState 20, then half count would be 10, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Now, that's all vanilla JavaScript. There's no framework magic there. So
Yeah.
how do we then glue that back in to a framework, right? So if we
Yeah.
go look at, actually, this is going to sound really weird. Let's go look at Vue rather than looking at React, and I'll come back to
Okay.
why in a second.
Yeah. No, for sure.
But the API for Vue looks something like this. We have use store, you pass
Yeah.
the store, and then you pass a selector, right?
Okay.
So you have the framework agnostic stuff that lives outside of the framework, and then you
Mhm.
bind it back into the framework by doing use store and then listen to exactly what state you want to change, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I change select here, it will re-render this component in Vue or whatever framework. The API for is very, very similar between the frameworks.
Yeah.
But if I update ignored, it won't re-render this component because we haven't selected that state to listen for, right?
Okay.
So the way that that code works is that we have a slice of the store, right? And
Mhm.
that's done by, you can imagine ref as like a use state for those that aren't familiar with Vue.
Okay.
And we call the selector function with the initial state of the store to get the very first slice, right? Of the
Okay.
store given the function, right? Then we watch for changes to the store. So if you, for whatever reason, pass in a brand new store, it'll go figure it out for you, right?
Yeah.
But otherwise, we subscribe to the store. We rerun whenever there's an updated value to the store, we rerun the selector. We
Okay.
shallowly compare whether the new value is the same as the old value.
Okay.
If it is, early return. Otherwise, set the data and re-render.
Okay.
That's it,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
And the shallow function is, again, very straightforward. It checks to see if the objects are the same, if they're both null, if the maps have the same keys, same with sets, so on and so forth, right?
Okay.
So then in React, we get something even more magic. Instead of doing a manual mount and then a watch and whatever, we can do this use sync external store with selector, which is a
Okay.
hook written by the React team. And what this does is this allows us to access the state even when in server-side rendering mode. So this is how
Oh,
we're
okay.
able to
Cool.
support Next.js and whatnot.
Okay.
And the API is pretty similar. We have a subscribe method, right? We
Okay.
have an accessor for the current and previous state. Actually, I think one of them might be server state, one of them might be client state. And then we have the function
Okay.
that's the selector, and then the shallow comparison.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Cool.
That's it. So that's
Nice.
how we're
Okay.
able to very similarly like inject. This is React now, right? And this
Yeah.
is how we're able to very similarly inject the store into re-rendering this function, right? So there's really no difference between something like this, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Like if we think about it, the use state flags to the VDOM that it needs to re-render this component, right? But we're
Yeah.
hooking into that same mechanism with use sync external store to be able to hook into that re-render mechanism to just get a new access to the state, right?
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. And then like obviously at the React level as an app dev, it's just exposed as a hook. And then so like
Mhm.
even if you didn't care about the internals, like to you it's just like, okay, hook, I update something, and then or like something gets updated, I'll get a re-render happening
Right,
with some new
right.
state. Yeah. Okay,
So
that's
then
super nice.
if we go look at TanStack Form, and this one I know will have a ton of updates because my team's been crushing it. Huge shout out to
Okay.
the rest of the team for sure. Let me go discard that. Actually, before we do that,
I'll make your screen a little bigger actually.
okay, there we go. Oh, that's not nearly zoomed in enough. Here we go.
All right, cool.
So here, if I go look at, so in TanStack Form, there are
Mhm.
two core classes to consider. There's the Form API, and then there's the Field API, right?
Okay.
So if we go look at some simple tests, you can see that in vanilla JavaScript, it looks something like this, where we have a form that has default values, right?
Yeah.
And TypeScript is able to infer these default values as the type of the form itself, right? And then we have a new field, which has a form instance that's associated with it, and a name of the field. So if I change this from name to T, we can see
Yeah.
that there's now type name is not assignable to type T, right? So we have type safety even within the core JavaScript library, which is pretty neat.
Hmm.
And then we can see that field.state.value is test, right?
Okay.
And we can even do things like we can register our validators to be on. Oh, whoops. That's funny. But we can do like an on change, right? And
Okay.
now field.state.errors or field.state.meta.error map on change. I know that's a mouthful, but you likely won't be typing it. But now the type of that on change will be either please enter a default value or undefined, right? So we're even type inferring the return type of this on change validator, you know? But
Yeah.
this is just to showcase that like all of the APIs that you know and love from the React Ace side of
Yeah.
TanStack Form is also available in other stuff. Oh, is my internet having
Uh,
problems?
uh, some people were saying the font looks a little grainy. I increased the size. I don't think it's on my end because I have like 1 gigabit up down, but
I
it actually
had
looks
the
better
same.
now.
That's
Okay,
interesting. I had the
weird.
same. Maybe I was just having issues for the moment or something.
Okay, and I can definitely read it now.
Okay.
I like I
Okay.
said, I made the screen a bit bigger, but
Got it.
what was I gonna say? Yeah, one thing I'm gonna say is like people might ask like is TanStack, not stable, but is it like battle tested? And you're showing me this stuff through what looks like hundreds of unit tests. Uh,
Oh
so
yeah. Oh yeah.
so I feel pretty confident seeing that. So
If we just go into the core library, right? Oh, and we just run the type tests, or not the type tests, the library tests, because we have type tests, we have library tests, we have all sorts of different types of tests. But if we just quickly run this, we can see that it is already at 270. We have 270 tests, with like 90 plus coverage on most files. Um, so yeah, I'd
okay,
like to say that we're fairly stable.
yeah, no, that's cool. No, it's
Yeah.
always nice to see tests in there,
Oh
for
yeah,
sure.
good
Especially
times.
like I mean, people should have tests in general, but I think it's crucial if you're like a library, that's potentially used by millions of people. You know what I mean? So
Right,
it just good
right.
to see that. Obviously, you got the TypeScript goodness too, which helps, which is
Yeah.
nice.
And it's funny because you can see that we have like 670 lines of TypeScript just in this one
Yeah,
file. Like it took me to get that all the way down here to even get to the JavaScript stuff, and there's still a bunch
yeah,
of TypeScript. It's a good time.
yeah. And this is, I guess, just another thing, but like I don't know. I think if libraries are written well, you'll typically not be writing a lot of types in
Yeah.
application code that consumes it, like you can obviously still add a type, but it's just not necessary because like I know from like TanStack router and like even TanStack table, it's like all the types get inferred really,
Yep.
really well. And like obviously a lot of work went into that. And I think uh Josh is like, you too much TypeScript.
You
Um,
types. Also, don't look at this. Josh, don't look.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The that makes me laugh a bit because like the definitely type project. I remember when I started using TypeScript and like the ecosystem was just growing. Like I think it was Lodash and others eventually too. But like just to have the APIs work because TypeScript wasn't in a state to actually support all the different variations of those APIs. So like everything was just any. But like
Yeah.
you still got the IntelliSense at least. So, but
Yeah. Josh is actually asking why are so many type params on form API needed? So we showed earlier, right?
yeah,
Because wait until I get to field API. And let me go find the class. Yeah, wait until I get to the field API. So what we have is I can just pull it up here. It's fine. Nope, I can't pull
cool.
it up here. You'd think I could. So if I do, I really need to get to one of my test files. I'm sorry. Hang on.
Oh yeah,
Open
no
my
worries.
test. Here we go. Okay. So I showcased earlier that if I have a validator and it returns a value here, and I do field.state.meta.errormap.onChange,
Yeah,
we can see that it is actually getting the type of please enter a different value, right? Or
yeah,
undefined. That is actually being inferred from this on-change return type, right?
yeah.
But what if I have a validator on the form now I should get an error on the T field that
Okay.
says hello, right?
Yeah.
So now if I hover over this on change, it's a little too complex to represent because of course it is, but it will actually showcase hello or please enter a different value or undefined.
Okay.
Like it'll correctly assess that I have returned a type from this on change function on the
Okay.
form API and infer it on the field itself. So this is why we have on change, on mount, on submit, on blur, and I think that's it. We also have on server technically. So
Okay.
that's 5 different functions that we need to infer the return type from. And
Okay.
then for the field, we need to infer that for both the form and the field, right?
Yeah.
So that's 10. Plus we have, oh, and then we have async. So that's another 5, right?
Yeah.
Because you can do on change and on change async. So that's the big reason why we have so many generics, is that we have not just kind of type safety, we have uber duper extreme ultra mode type safety.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
no, totally. And like again, to just to reiterate, this is something the consumer of these of TanStack form wouldn't need to worry about, but this
mhm.
is why you get all that goodness. You and your team put in all the hard work to just ensure that people don't have to worry about that stuff. So
Right, right. And I think that feature on its own, the ability to return anything here, right? Because not
yeah.
all it's like, oh, cool, you can validate a string. Wow. But what you can do here is you can even do like password true, or like instead of password, uppercase true, lowercase
Okay.
false, right? You can return anything from these error methods or these validation types, and that'll
Okay.
tell you that you're able to like now if I go to field.state.meta.errormap.onChange, and then you can see that I have now lowercase and uppercase that's auto completing,
Yeah.
right? And that's just because we don't just expect you to return a string. We want you to return whatever you want in these validators, which is a bit of a superpower of TanStack Form.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So,
No,
yeah.
that's super nifty. Yeah, Josh is saying, yeah, this is really nice. Roughly no reasonable end user would probably ever be able to justify
Totally.
spending that time. But yeah, no, yeah, in the libraries or frameworks, that's where you'll see most of these complex types. You know, I've I've had to write some somewhat complicated type sometimes in an app, but I would say it's pretty rare,
Yeah.
unless it's like some custom logic maybe,
I think
but yeah.
this is my favorite type in the whole library, which is where is it? Oh, they may have refactored it. I think they refactored it. I don't know what these do anymore. Oh no. How dare the team be better at TypeScript than I am? Yeah, they definitely refactored it. It looks a
Yeah.
lot cleaner now because we used to have like this like deep keys function or type function that was just
Okay.
like 30 lines of recursive type logic and it was awesome. And
Yeah,
what it
yeah.
did is you would be able, oh, maybe it is, yeah, this looks so much better now.
Yeah.
But the idea behind deep keys is that it'll actually get you every possible key for an object. So
Okay.
that, and it'll do it deeply, so you can do like a dot b dot c dot d or whatnot. So yeah.
Okay. There's a couple comments from Dolce Bruh, I think. He says
Yeah,
speaks
don't
to
say
TS form.
hey.
Okay, I guess you know them. Yeah. So speaks to TS form flexibility, no. And they say I think one of the downsides of form libs is you feel so tied to them. And
Yeah.
that is true.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why, like, when we were building TanStack Form, we wanted to build a way that allowed you to have like this middle layer between your code base, right? So at the top layer,
Mhm.
you might have like your application code itself, and at the bottom layer, you might have like UI library code, right? Like whether that's vendored or internal or whatever. You might have
Yeah.
specific buttons or input types or whatever. And the big challenge is that people want, from my experience, they want a middle layer where they have a form library that integrates with
Yeah.
their UI library, right?
Yeah.
But the challenge is
No,
how do
totally.
you extract that out into its own individual component that isn't so tied to the forms themselves? And this is where
Yeah.
some of the more complex libraries of um, create form hook, I think is the name of the API in React comes into play.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah.
we can touch on
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is like as an end user, I wouldn't care so much about TanStack Form working in multiple frameworks because like I'm a React
Right.
dev. I just use TanStack Form for
Totally.
React, but uh, it also ties back into the entire like headless UI game to some degree where
Right.
you're not like because like one of the problems with a lot of live well it's becoming more and more popularized to have headless UI now, but like
Mhm.
even a few years ago still like 'cause my first encounter of headless UI was Kenzie Dodd's React Downshift, which was I
Mhm.
think it was a multi-select. I can't remember what it was. I think it was multi-select or some kind of select form, but like prior to that, it's like and this is not a knock on like Bootstrap or like MUI or whatever, but like you're you use that particular element and you get all the logic for it, that component, but you're deeply tied to its representation like visually. And so like I think that's one of the other niceties about having something like TanStack Form is like you definitely have all these like levers and access to like all the state, but you can literally drive how you want the UI to look.
Yep, yep, exactly, exactly. And what's nice is
Cool.
that by being framework agnostic, we're also able to run in environments that you might not expect, like
Yeah.
SSR, right? So, like, not only
Hmm.
are we able to server side render, but we can run code from TanStack Form on the server to be able to transform things and then send it back to the client and then reinitialize the state based on the state from the server. So you can
Yeah.
turn off JavaScript with TanStack Form, submit a form, and still get all your validation logic in place as if your client side JavaScript was enabled. And
Okay.
that's not something that I've seen any other form library in React do,
Yeah.
except for
And you
conform. Maybe conform.
Yeah. And you've been talking about validation a lot, and I think I read this somewhere, but you support standard schema. So, like, if people wanted to
Yep.
use Valibot or Zod, which Zod, like, I'm a fan of Valibot. A lot of good stuff there, but like, obviously,
Yeah.
Zod still seems to be very popular.
Mhm.
but that's kind of nice that there's standard schema support in there as well.
Yeah, so
Okay, yeah,
we
so
have a
like
Zod
there's
schema
Zod here,
here,
yeah.
we have a valbot schema, archetype schema, effect schema, so on and so forth, right?
Oh, even affect TS?
Literally,
Okay, nice.
oh yeah, and you can even
Okay,
literally just go in here and change a single line and immediately support any of these schemas.
okay. So
So
that's super nice too. Okay,
yeah.
cool. Um, Josh was saying it would be cool to see this more generalized, like a dedicated set of packages for generating a form from a standard schema.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've heard requested that we've intentionally not sought out at this point is the
Okay.
ability to generate forms. Um, I think that a lot of forms are more manual and more bespoke.
Hmm.
And this is where TanStack Form tends to fit in pretty well. If you're looking for like a form builder library, I think that you can do it with TanStack Form, but I think
Yeah.
that the TypeScript stuff in particular is kind of like a shotgun overkill for that
Okay.
those needs. So
Yeah. And my buddy Fuzzy in the chat saying,
yeah,
Corbin, I need you to hit you up about standard schema. So
hit me
I
up.
guess
You know,
reach out. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure what Fuzzy needs there, but yeah, yeah. Standard. Just kind of slight tangent, but standard schema came about because it Valabot and Zod that
an
just kind of
arc,
teamed up
from what I
instead.
understand.
Okay, okay. No, that's pretty cool that they went and did that.
It's
And
so cool. It's the type of like friendly competitiveness that I like aspire for all source projects to be eventually. Like it's a beautiful work too, unironically.
yeah, and yeah, like we both work in open source, and this is something I love too. My awesome old coworker Brandon, who's working
Hmm.
on analog. I know he's worked a lot with Tanner, with
Oh yeah.
router and stuff. And like it's just super cool to see that collaboration. And I know like even my old coworker Ryan Carniato is like a big fan of this. Like it's
Yep.
because I know him and Tanner have riffed a lot. Like they,
Oh yeah. I
I,
mean
I,
the start naming now,
yeah, yeah,
or even going back to Bling days or oh yeah, yeah, big time.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's just really cool to see it because it's completely different from like if you think of like closed source, like competitive, like
Hmm.
obviously you still want your open source project to do well, but I don't know, it's just different, like so.
Yeah, big time.
Anyways, yeah, cool, cool.
So
Yeah, so we've kind of seen like a bit of the inner workings, kind of understand how TanStack Form works now. Would you be cool with like maybe just showing? We can even do just
let's
like a
do it.
minimal example of a form, just wiring it up, just so people can get a feel for how you
Yep.
would leverage this as an app dev.
Let's do it. So let
Cool.
me actually go and create a brand new form, and then y'all can roast me.
Okay.
All right. So the first stop it, Copilot, go away. Hush, shush, shush. Okay. So can't make it too easy on me now. So in fact, let's do one with Zod. I like Zod. Zod is good
Okay. Yep.
because I think that's more emblematic of what people are going to end up using anyways.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
So let's do that. Let's do that. And we're going to delete a bunch of random stuff here. Okay. So you might have a schema, right?
Hmm.
That schema might have an object with name, which is a z.string, which we're not going to validate because you should not be validating names, people. Please don't.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we're going to do an age with a minimum number of 12 or 13 or whatever. I don't remember what the ages are for like Discord's minimum age use policy or whatever, right?
Okay. Cool.
So we can do const form equals use form, and we're going to do a default values. And so this is important. In order to build a form in TanStack Form, and in most
Yep.
form libraries, I'd argue, you have to have some kind of default values, right?
Yeah.
Because if I just have undefined here, well, that's not a string, right? And
Yeah.
likewise, it's not an object. So if we have undefined here, we're not respecting the schema's initial values, right?
Yeah.
So we can
Totally.
do z dot input type of, because there is a distinction. A lot of people use z dot infer, but z dot infer actually is the output type of the schema, not the input type.
Yeah.
So it's important to do z dot input. So here I'm going to
Okay.
do name is an empty string, age is 0, right? And then we're
Yeah.
going to do validators. On change is the schema, and we're going to have an on submit, which accepts values and does an alert on JSON.stringify value null 2, just to format it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So what's interesting here is that we just use a hook, right, to give us a form instance.
Yeah.
But from here, once we have the this is like not a component. This is just the HTML form, right?
Yeah.
But then we can do form dot field, and this is a component returned from the hook, which is kind of
Okay.
wild. But the
Yeah.
reason we do that is that now I can do name, and you can see that it's already auto completing for me, right?
Yeah.
Of what the name of the thing is. And I can do children, and I can say field. We can do an input. Now, ideally, we have a label. We have other stuff here, right?
Okay.
We can do an on change of field dot handle change. In fact, I need to do e dot target dot value, and we can do on blur, which is field dot handle blur, and then we can do value, which is field dot state dot value. We can format this maybe. I'm not used to
Okay.
being this zoomed in.
Yeah. 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 A couple questions too. I was gonna ask the same question as Josh. Is there any reason why you used as versus satisfies for the Z input up top there
Oh,
on line?
no, we could totally do
Okay.
satisfies.
Okay. Cool. And the other
It just
question.
requires me to spell.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. The other question I had is there is there a technical reason why children is using prop syntax versus just being like within the form JSX?
Preference.
Okay,
No other
cool.
reason, just preference.
Yeah, cool, cool.
Um, and then that's it. Like so we have like we can even do a button with a type submit. We can say submit, and we can do one for age. Now there is a bit of trickiness here. First of all, you'll notice that age is yelling at me because value is a string, so you need to
Oh
do
yeah.
value as a number, right?
Okay.
But then second of all, we need to show errors. So we'll do field dot state dot meta errors.
Oh, interesting. Forcing you to have the errors render even if there is no errors.
Yeah. Well, not necessarily. So I'm not rendering them on name because it's not possible to hit errors on name,
Okay.
right? But we could possibly hit this on age because we have a validation here of min,
Yeah.
right? So I'm going to do key is error.toString. Please don't yell at me. It's fine. Oh, right. Actually, it's let's do error.path. I
Okay.
forgot that we're using Zod. Why? You're going to yell at me that you made it not exist. Yep.
Oh yeah. Because well, actually,
I get why.
why wouldn't error
Because,
exist? Because if it's mapping over it, like it's gonna end up in there.
yeah, error may technically be undefined. Um,
Okay.
this is like a technical correctness thing that feels very incorrect.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, because like you would assume it. I would assume as an app developer, if I'm mapping over the errors,
Yeah.
there would be errors in the map, but this is just because, like you're saying, under the hood, error could actually just not be defined.
Right, right.
Okay.
What is happening here? Cannot read key.
Uh,
Sure.
oh,
Yeah.
that's no, that makes sense. It's because if error is undefined, error.path is undefined, so it's not string.
But then I had it defaulted to a string, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know
that's
why.
true. Yeah,
It's fine. It's fine. It's all fine. It's always fine.
yeah, yeah. Slap an any in there too. Why not? Um,
Yeah, you know what? Just for you, Josh.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Josh is laughing, but on the inside, he's not.
He's crying. Yeah, on the inside, he's crying. Okay, so now we can do a PNPM dev, and this might not work, but we're gonna see. So now if I hit submit, oh right, I have to prevent default. I
Oh
knew
yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
was gonna break.
Oh,
So
that
now if
brings
I
up
do an on
a
submit,
good question. So
yeah,
there's a prevent default, but you can obviously have like obviously if it's server like full post back, you support that too. Obviously, like just
yeah,
traditional. Okay.
yep. Okay, and now, ta-da! Wow,
Okay. Cool.
it's incredible. And we can do. Oh, okay. Hang on. This is actually my fault. I need to do type number.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
There we go. So boom. Now we can see that we have an on change handler. We could change that to an on blur handler. We could change that to non submit handler, and now it's valid.
Okay. Okay. That's cool. Like
Yeah.
obviously this is a trivial example, but it does showcase like you know just the power behind this, and like obviously if you had a more complex form, like I could definitely see this just being a lot easier to manage because like
Yeah.
it's like you said at the near the beginning of the stream, like a form where it's just like name and password, or like name, maybe even address, is
Hmm.
not that huge a form, but it starts to get unwieldy pretty quickly, a form.
Right.
Yeah.
And what you can even do is you can like I'll kind of skip over this because I know we're running a little light on time. But what
Yeah.
you can even do is you can abstract like text fields into their own components. So then you can have
Okay, yeah.
like multiple fields just back to back to back to back to back, and each one of them can even have their can still have their own validation logic in line if you want. So you can have both field and form validation and mix and match them. So you can
Yeah.
do all sorts of wild customization there.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. You can abstract it away into its own component.
Yeah.
I know I hung out with Jack Harrington. Was it last? I think it was last week actually, or maybe yeah, it was last week. We were looking at Create TS router,
Oh yeah. Super cool
which is
project.
pretty solid. And I can't remember. Do you know if TanStack Form supported in there now? I know he keeps adding stuff.
It may not yet, and if
Okay,
not, that's on me. Jack went to me on day one. He's like, "How do we add it?" And I was like, "I'm missing a feature," and he's like, "Okay."
okay, okay,
So shout out Jack. Jack's awesome, but that's I think he might be waiting on me.
okay. Cool, cool. Yeah, I guess some other questions I have are like obviously Shad CN is very popular.
Yes.
Um, do you know if if there's potential for, I mean, you can obviously use Shad CN and just wire this in, but is there
Mhm.
like any potential collaboration happening there in terms of like
Yeah. So I haven't heard about it in a little bit, but when V1 came out, Shad announced that he's working on the TanStack Form version of things. So
oh
we should see
nice,
it.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's awesome. Yeah, because that's like, well, that's just a huge win for the ecosystem
Yeah.
in
Oh
general.
yeah.
But yeah, also just selfishly, oh, I don't have to wire
Very
it all up
excited.
per
Yeah.
se. But that's super cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is really, really cool. And like one thing I got to say about like TanStack projects in general is
Mhm.
like the level of detail that goes into like the APIs, the docs, everything. It's like top
Yeah.
tier, and like I'm sure you're all driving that. Like Kevin's done a lot of amazing work
Yes.
with React with TanStack table, and I know he also maintains a MUI table. I think that's how he got involved in the project initially.
Yeah, he's got
Um,
movie table. He's got a couple of tables actually. Funny enough,
okay.
the man's a table machine.
Yeah, yeah, and like obviously Tanner is a machine. Um,
Oh yeah,
I
the whole crew is, yeah, big time.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, we're kind of getting near the end here, but this is something like you've been working in open source for a while. I know like a bunch of people in the chat have, and like I have too. But like getting into open source or like, or I guess I don't think I asked you this at the beginning of the stream, but how did you get involved with TanStack Form or TanStack in general? Because I imagine you've probably worked on other parts of TanStack.
Now I have, but at the very
Okay.
beginning, it was this form library that I wrote.
Okay.
Um, so I wrote and released a form library called House Form, which
Okay.
was mediocre at best. But it's I call it mediocre at best, but there's still a couple of companies using it that have refused to move to TanStack Form. So I'm either doing
Okay.
something really good or really bad.
Okay.
But the gist of it is that I'd started working on this, and
Yeah.
then I was invited to a clerk hackathon where Tanner was going to be because of my work on House Form. And I had
Okay.
originally seen, actually, it might even be on our blog post for TanStack Form. Just really quickly, yeah. And Tanner had posted that he's gonna quote launch TanStack Form soon, only if he knew. Um,
Yeah.
and I was like, hey, this makes too much sense. I love it. I'm considering abandoning my form library. If you're up for it, and he's like, hey, I'd love for that. Let's chat. And
Okay.
we met at the hackathon, ended up talking, and the rest is kind of history. We just ended up working together on it.
Oh, that's super cool, man.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and like, oh yeah, Josh saying, "Yay for real! It feels really comfortable using it all. Helps with the JS fatigue. Will I have
yeah,
to re-architect this in 6 months? Worry." Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Yeah, and I don't know. My experience using any of the TanStack stuff has been just pretty much joy for the most part. You know what I mean?
glad to hear.
Like, like ta- I don't know. TanStack table was just nice out of the box. TS router is really great. I'm really bullish on TanStack Start. Um, I'm not like where I'm at right now. I'm a DevRel and I'm not even working in front end really. So like I'm not really digging into that right now. But like, I think if I were starting a new React project right now, I would probably go with TanStack Start, even though it's not officially 1.0
Yeah,
yet.
yeah.
Like, I don't know. There's just a lot of niceties, like even the invalidation. Like, I know we're talking about TanStack Form today, but like
No, you're good.
the thing I liked about TanStack Start was like, so you have your server functions, and you know, a lot of not all frameworks, but there are some that abstract away the actual web request, and
Yeah,
so like you don't have to use the raw web request at all. Like you can just do whatever you want to do like out of the box. But if you need to dig into that, you can I think it's just like dot web request or something. And if you need to access headers or other stuff. So I thought that was super nice. And I also like how when the server function updates whatever it's updating, it stays cached, and you have to explicitly I think it's a invalidate, I forget the name of the property, but like you can like see it happen instantly. So like you could just fire and forget a ton of times, and then when you're ready
yeah.
to like just so it's pretty solid. And
No, it's awesome.
yeah,
It's very cool. Yeah.
cool, awesome. Well, this has been awesome, Corbin. I'm gonna drop a link where people can give you a follow and stuff.
Ah,
And
thank you.
um I know that's got your website and I think your Twitch and YouTube. Does your website have like the links to like framework field guide and all that, or should I just link to those?
I'm curious which website you linked. Let's see
It's whatever you
here.
sent me. I didn't actually check.
That's fair.
uh,
Oh,
yeah, yeah, that's
crushcorn.f. Perfect. Yep, that's
yeah, yeah.
perfect.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, so check that out, and also, folks, check out TanStack Form. Check out all the TanStack libraries. And in terms of I'm gonna ask the obvious here, but like, you're always looking for people to contribute to the projects or open up
Always.
issues and cool.
Yeah, come
Awesome.
chat with
Cool.
me. Happy to get you onboarded.
Cool,
So,
cool. That's awesome. Also, just want to thank people in the chat today. Big shout out to Fuzzy and Josh and Dolce Bra. And yeah, thanks everybody. I don't have another stream scheduled yet at the moment because I've just been hella busy on the road with work. But definitely have some. Oh, what am I saying? I'm hanging with Ray Deck next week. We're gonna be talking about like AI and like just like the hardest part is that like last 5%.
oh yeah.
So check that out next week. And Corbin, if you don't mind just staying on for a second, and everybody else, we will see you in the next one.
All right. Shoot.